Hannah Kaplan, and this is the WCS Wild audio podcast, where you'll find reported audio stories covering the latest news and newsmakers from the Wildlife Conservation Society's Global Conservation Program, Zoos and Aquarium, and their many partners. We've got a great show today, so let's get to it. Cali, Colombia will soon play host to the biennial gathering of parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity. WCS will have a significant delegation on the ground. For our second episode highlighting this important global meeting, Wild Audio's Nat Moss caught up with a few critical members of that delegation to hear their thoughts on the coming meeting and what WCS's priorities will be.
The Convention on Biological Diversity, or CBD, was one of the original Rio conventions, named for the 1992 Rio Earth Summit from which they emerged. The 196 countries that are parties to the CBD convention meet in 2 weeks in Cali, Colombia for their 16th COP.
The word COP means Conference of the Parties, and for any international treaty, that's where decisions are made.
Sue Lieberman is Vice President of International Policy at the Wildlife Conservation Society. She explains the unique role of groups like WCS at these gatherings.
Governments who are parties, who are members, get together. In the case of a Convention on Biological Diversity, every 2 years. Conservation organizations, non-governmental organizations, organizations representing indigenous peoples are what are called observers. But we don't just go to the meeting and observe the governments and take notes. Observers provide scientific, technical information to the governments and often advocate certain outcomes. I like to think of many observers being the conscience of these conventions or these COPs.
The Convention on Biological Diversity adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework 2 years ago in Montreal, with the goal of protecting, restoring, and investing in nature while maintaining nature's contributions to people, who should share in its benefits equally. The coming meeting in Cali is the first COP since Montreal.
And this is an opportunity for governments to take stock. How are we doing? It's 2024. They adopted this framework and committed to a lot of great things to be accomplished by 2030. We're almost halfway there. How is it going? Some governments are making really good progress, and some governments are not.
Catalina Gutiérrez is country director of the WCS Colombia program. As a representative of the host country for the coming meeting, she's been paying close attention.
In Montreal, the targets were defined, but full agreements on the monitoring framework were left pending. So at COP16, it's expected that countries will agree on the monitoring framework to be used to verify the compliance with national action plans and in turn track progress toward the 23 global targets. So that's something that is important to continue to be defined during this COP coming from Montreal.
Sue explains that WCS has been actively working with governments to make progress on their targets.
WCS works across the globe with governments to assist them in implementing the 23 targets in the framework. The governments in Montreal adopted a very important target when they agreed to protect or conserve at least 30% of the land, freshwater, and oceans of our planet. And that doesn't mean national parks everywhere, but it means areas that are conserved based on sound science, equitably considering the needs of local peoples. It's called 30 by 30 because it's 30% by the year 2030. And there's been some good progress.
Catalina offers Colombia as a case in point.
Colombia has made significant progress toward this target, with 37% of marine areas and 31% of the terrestrial areas now under conservation, either as a protected areas or as a OECMs. It stands for other effective conservation measures. However, an important topic of discussion in Colombia and in general in the region is how the ethnic territories, or particularly in Colombia, those from the indigenous peoples and the Afro-Colombian communities, will contribute to this target. Their contribution may not necessarily fall under the typical categories of the protected areas or OECMs, but could take different shape or different names and through different governance models or frameworks.
Like the CBD's David Cooper in our previous episode, Sue clarifies that what's important is not just the protection of 30% of nature, but that it's the right 30%.
If you think of a site or an ecosystem, a place, then what is its structure? What is its function? What is its composition? Does it have the species that naturally occur there? Are the species performing their roles in their ecosystem? Or is that system degraded with roads and development, and have the species been overexploited so it no longer functions as it should function? There's a gradient between areas that are completely functioning in their natural state, the way they have evolved over eons, and areas that have had human impact in such a way that some of its integrity ecologically is gone. Think of nature along a continuum, and the ecological integrity, it's not just how much area there is, but how is that area functioning?
This focus on ecological integrity is a central priority for WCS. Jose Luis Gomez is WCS Regional Director for the Andes, Amazon, and Orinoco region. He says the ecological integrity focus is especially important when considering CBD parties' national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or NBSAPs as they're known.
We are placing ecological integrity at the center as a unifying concept that links the biodiversity, climate, and health crisis that we are currently facing. Now, how does this translate into action with Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador? On biodiversity, we strive for our governments in these countries to incorporate ecological integrity into their NBSAPs and to prioritize and plan biodiversity conservation efforts, particularly 30 by 30 strategies, and to measure effectiveness. We expect governments and societies and countries to understand that ecological integrity has direct impacts on both human and ecosystem health, that losses of integrity have to be avoided for the sake of biodiversity and people.
Catalina highlights that the theme of this year's CBD COP is Peace with Nature, a theme that resonates strongly in a country known for its incredible biodiversity.
The theme for this COP is Peace with Nature. For us, we interpret this peace with nature in two senses. One is to really change our way to relate with nature as a society and to help reduce the socio-ecological conflicts that may arise between humans and nature. And then the other aspect for us is how nature can help us to bring peace to a country like Colombia, right? It's like peace can be the inspiration for supporting a society that can really live from biodiversity and therefore make a better future.
Jose Luis adds another regional dimension of this year's biodiversity COP, which arrives a year ahead of the UN climate COP in neighboring Brazil.
I think that from a regional and very political point of view, I expect that a key outcome is to enable the global community to build bridges between this biodiversity COP16 in Colombia and the climate COP30 that will take place in Brazil next year. We have to stress this need to link these two global crises, biodiversity loss and climate change, and to really boost implementation to effectively counter both.
For her own part, Catalina is excited at the attention that this year's meeting will bring to urgent environmental priorities in Colombia.
In addition to the positive outcomes that we expect from the priorities that we have mentioned, I'm really excited about the lasting legacy this conference can leave for Colombia, and especially for Cali. You can feel COP in the air. It's part of the everyday conversations. Being the host city has sparked real interest from the local government and also from the environmental authorities, pushing them to speed up and strengthen their environmental programs. So it's inspiring to see how hosting this event has become a catalyst for action at the local and the national level.
Next week, we look at how the U.S. government is working to help realize the goals and targets set in motion in Montreal. For WCS Wild Audio, this is Nat Moss.
Today's episode was produced and reported by Nat Moss, with help from Hannah Kaplan and Dan Rosen. The WCS Wild Audio podcast is a production of the Wildlife Conservation Society. Please join us next week for a new episode. And don't forget to rate or review the show wherever you get your podcast.